Okay, so gentlemen, let's get started because we don't have a lot of time today. So let's start. We had seen yesterday the halacha in the Shulchan Aruch Harav that if you injure your friend, even unintentionally, even if you make compensation for the damage that you cause them, you still have to ask them mechila, and they have to be, you have to receive their forgiveness in order to achieve ultimate atonement for what you've done. Okay, so we're looking at now the Imrei Yaakov on Sif Vav. Everyone see it's Sif Cut and Mem Dalet over here. He says, Hamamon shenis chayev litain, you've already made proper compensation. So this is on page Kuf Peches. Okay, so Kaimalan, we paskin, da hachovel b'chaveru chayev b'chamisha dvarim, that when you injure someone with bodily injury, you're liable for 5 different types of compensation. It's not just to pay for the depreciation of the person. Let's say, in other words, the person gets awarded their physical disability. What we mean by that is that there's an objective physical value that every human being has as far as their ability to be productive in the free market. The Gemara talks about it in terms of slave labor, but the truth is that we would update that to say that we would say how much is the person disabled so that they can no longer do the job that they were able to do before. So that's the depreciation in their physical value. That's what we would call nezek. The next thing is called sa'ar, which we would call pain. Ripoy is medical expenses. Shevet is workers' comp, or your workers' time off. You have to pay for the fact that a person, while they're recovering from their injury, can't work in many instances, and you have to pay them for their time off from work. Is that what we call workers' comp? Is that, yeah? Right. Right. So, but what we're saying here is that the compensation due is that even if I didn't injure them at work, but I caused them to be unable to work for a certain amount of time, I have to pay for their wages, loss of work. Okay, loss of work. Oh, that's not work. So
disability insurance, I guess. Really?
Got it. Okay. All right. And then the 5th one is boshet, which we would call, I guess, suffering or humiliation. We group together pain and suffering as one compensatory damage, but the Gemara divides it into 2. Sa'ar is pain, the amount of actual discomfort that a person had to undergo in order to go through this recovery. And boshet is the emotional trauma. And the boshet literally means embarrassment. The fact that they've been laid up and they've been traumatized emotionally by it. So the Beis Din would have to make an assessment of that as well. So those are the 5 forms of damage that can be assessed by a Beis Din to determine what a person is subject to compensation for. V'hainu im hachavalahu b'inyan sheyesh ba kol hachamesh. But that's, of course, assuming that the form of damage that was caused is inclusive of all 5. Now, not all the time is an injury going to make you unable to work. Sometimes a person may get a broken nose, but they're still completely capable of working, right? But there still may be pain and suffering, there may be embarrassment and so forth. The Yesh omrim ditzarach litain gam kein tosefet mizonot hatzrichin lechol yom mima shehaya ochel keshehaya bari. Other opinions suggest that in addition to these 5, you also have to make compensation for the different kinds of food that this person needs because of their illness, that they're necessary for their recovery. It's included in medical expenses, not just medicine, not just doctor's bills, but also if a person needs a different diet, which is more expensive for their recovery, you have to pay for that as well. Vim ein ba ele dalid mishalim dalid, vim gimel mishalim gimel, vim beis beis, vim aleph aleph. And of course, whatever is commensurate to this particular case in question is what a person has to pay. Sometimes not all five will apply. If it's 4, 4, if it's 3, 3, if it's 2, 2, if it's 1, 1. Ketzat. So let's look at an illustration. He says, Kata yado o raglo o etzba echad. All right, I cause a Ruvain injures Shimon, and Shimon loses a hand or a leg, or even just a finger. Or he caused him the loss or injury of any other organ. No saying lo kol hachamisha dvar. Then all 5 compensatory awards would apply. Hikahu al yado v'nifche v'sofel achzor. But here's another illustration. If he sustains an injury to his hand, and v'nifcha, and it becomes swollen, and he's expected to have a full recovery. Oh, hiko al eina umarda v'sofalachzor. Or let's say he's hit in the eye, and it swells up, or it starts to become, puffy, and but it's eventually going to heal. Ein kan nezek. So there's no nezek compensation because there's no permanent disability as a result of the injury, because we expect a full recovery. However, v'nosein lo shar daled dvarim, but he is entitled to compensation for the other 4. He's entitled to pain. He's entitled to medical expenses. He's entitled to time off from work. He's entitled to trauma payment. Okay. Yikahu al rosho v'nifcha ein kan nezek basheves sheharei yachol hamshich la'avod. If a guy is zetzt on the head, and he's expected to make a full recovery, so then there would be no nezek payment, nor would there be time off for time lost work, because he's still fully capable of working. And let's say in the example, but you still have to pay him for the other 3. Okay, and let's see. Let's say a person is stricken in a place where, first of all, no one saw it, and no one can see the place of the injury. So there's no embarrassment from him to have to sustain a cast or a bandage or anything like that. So then you only have to pay 2 things. You have to pay for the pain sustained, plus you have to pay for medical expenses. Let's say a guy takes his handkerchief and slaps it across the guy's face, like, you, sir, are a cur, and then he slaps him with his handkerchief, right? So there's no, like in one of those 18th century duels or whatever. So there's been no damage. There's no medical compensation. The guy's just got a red mark on his cheek. So there's nothing to pay for other than the humiliation. There is compensation due to someone if he's humiliated in public. What if I lock a guy in a closet and I haven't injured him at all, but I've prevented him from being able to work? So then he can take me to Beis Din to pay for his time off from work, because I've precluded him from being able to work. Now, it's not just if I lock him in a closet, but anytime I cause someone the inability to work, which is an interesting question, with traffic and things like that. Or let's say I'm blocking someone's driveway and he can't get his car out. That could be potentially an issue of damages, because I wasn't able to get to work today. I'm not sure. Aval im haya kvar bechatzer v'sagar alav milad says avirak rama ben ezekin upater medinei adam. He says, but it could be that in certain instances it's only a grama, and therefore I cannot be held liable. Let's say a person was already in a courtyard that had a gate or had some kind of wall. It was walled off, and all I did was I locked the gate. So now he can't get out. So that's called a grumma, because I didn't force him into the courtyard. He was already there. And all I did was lock it. So that's called grumma, because I didn't force him to be secluded. He was already secluded, and I just did a causative act to prevent him from getting out of his seclusion. So that would be, I'm liable midine shamayim, but I could not be assessed in that case. So it could be perhaps like in the case of blocking your driveway, maybe I cannot be assessed because your car was already in the driveway. Hachovel bechavero, bekara haor v'yatsa mimenu dam, chayav b'chamisha dvarim. Now, if a person injures his friend and tears the skin and it starts to bleed, then he is liable for all five types of compensation, which is surprising, right? Because, well, all right, so let's see. Let's see what he says. Shehaor eno chozer. So first of all, the skin doesn't heal perfectly. And I guess what he's saying is v'naset saleket, because there's going to be a scar. Okay. And so basically a person is entitled to compensation for the formation, for the disfiguration of a scar. And I guess the Beis Din would have to make that assessment, like how much is he entitled to? If it's like, on a part of his hand that he has a scar now, and it's not too many people see it and it doesn't bother anyone, probably a minor amount of compensation. If it's on the face, probably a more significant compensation. If she's a model, and right then a huge amount of compensation, because now her modeling career may be compromised, right? So all of it depends on the situation. I remember, was it back in the 80s or 90s when one of these models was cut up by one of these crazed fans, and her modeling career was basically put to an end. Okay, v'im danim v'inyanim elu bizman hazeh deleka dayanim smuchim. So now the general question is, how do we make those assessments nowadays? And do we make such assessments nowadays where we don't have expert judges in these areas, where the Beis Din does not have the level of sophistication in the modern world to be able to make these kinds of assessments? They can be made sometimes, in secular courts with various types of experts, but it's very difficult for us to convene a Beis Din which will have the resources to do this kind of real type of assessment. So he says, "Ayin lekamen siftes vav be'imrei Yaakov divrei maschel bechavolos v'chein divrei maschel uviyasho." We're going to discuss this later on when we get further into the chapter. We're going to discuss the whole issue of how we deal with this bisman hazet in today's world. And then he quotes from the Sefer Pischei Choshen that we've seen many times before. And what does it say in the Sefer Pischei Choshen? Dinira sha'af im hanizik mivutach. What if the injured party is insured? Okay, that's what the word mivutach means, right? The word bitachon, he has assurance or insurance in this case. Ein ze poter et hamazik mitashlum ripoy. This does not exempt the damager from paying for medical expenses. V'tzarech hanizak lahachzir lekupat cholim avur haripoy v'hatrufot shekibel lemakazu. And the Pischei Choshen says, shockingly, which I don't think we will be able to sustain halachically, he says that because the damager is liable to pay for the medical expenses, anything that's covered by my insurance, I have to return to the insurance company and collect from the damager and give the insurance company their money back. Now that seems counterintuitive, because the whole reason people have insurance is to cover expenses that are sustained through injury. Regardless of fault, most insurance companies have like a no-fault insurance, right? Va'ayin sham shenota b'le'inyan hotzaot hanilvot l'tzorach ripoy kagon nesiot l'rafei v'chayotze bazeh. Another thing that the Pischei Choshen says is that when it comes to expenses that are associated with medical expenses, so for example, taking the taxi to and from appointments, parking, and all these other ancillary expenses, she'enam bichlal ripoy rak grama, dumya dahotzaot shadam hotzi avur legabot chavo mibal chavo, she'en tzarech habal chov l'shalem lo. He says that those are not included in the medical expenses because those are ancillary and it's just considered a grama that I've caused you to have to spend this money in order to get the medical cure. So it's not something that I'm liable for. And he concludes, Vitzarich iyun. He says this needs further analysis. And he refers us to Siman Yud Aleph, where he'll discuss this a little bit further. I must say that this whole issue about insurance does not resonate with me at all. I don't believe that that would be the popular position among other poskim. And B'li Neder, I'll try and research it a little bit more and try to get you some different opinions on this matter.
I guess what it's trying to do is stop you from double dipping or being compensated doubly. On the other hand, it's a separate transaction you engaged in, so I don't see why that wouldn't hold. So I hear
especially when you're dealing with socialized insurance. Socialized medical care. Essentially, what the government is saying is we provide no fault medical insurance. In other words, we're not getting involved in who's liable for your injury. We will pay for your medical expenses for your injury. That's one of the benefits that you get for living in our country.
Indeed. But I'm thinking even if you were to extend this to car insurance, for example, the person who damages your car pays you and then you recover from the insurer as well. But I think you're still by law. Well, I don't know. And maybe that's a different, that takes away the socialized medicine question.
Yeah. All right. So we'll have to pick this up in Mirz Hashem tomorrow because we're out of time. Let me just remind you all that because it's so early, when you put on your tefillin and talis and tefillin, you don't make the bracha. And then right after you finish yishtabach, you touch your tefillin and make the bracha of lehoniach. You touch your shel rosh and you make the bracha of al mitzvah tefillin. And then you start with your talis. You just hold your tzitzis and you make the bracha of lihit atef b'tzitzis, and you can either kiss your tzitzis or just hold them. Then you make the bracha on the shel yad, then you make the bracha on the shel rosh while you're touching them, okay? So have a good day, everybody.
Meaningful fast, everyone.
Meaningful fast.